And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what the Federal Reserve would do. So let's take a look. Let's take this jump in prices in the early 70s, right? Which is either up here or in front of you on your screen, right? All right? What happens? Well, I'll just click on the short-term interest rates. A big jump in interest rates. Okay. Or you can take a look at the long-term rates. That probably show it too. Yeah, that'll show a pickup in rates also. Okay, so there's a jump in interest rates. Now, what is the jump in interest rates supposed to accomplish? It's supposed to dampen down demand because if interest rates are higher, less borrowing and less spending, correct? Mm-hmm. Now, did the Federal Reserve in its long-term plan want to dampen down demand and slow demand and slow production?
No.
No, but it had to because of the inflation. So it had to abandon its long-term goal in order to fight this brush fire. But the problem was that the rate of inflation did go up. And the Fed was not able to force it back down all the way, because to force it back all the way down would have meant a very, very substantial period of unemployment, right? Would have really meant holding interest rates way up for a long time and really shrinking demand and causing havoc. So the Federal Reserve wouldn't do that. And so what happened was the rate of inflation wouldn't fall all the way back down to where it had been. You see, the Fed would tighten up, as they say, and through its tight policies would force a contraction in the economy, and prices, the rate of inflation would fall, but not back down to where it had been. Now, sir, what was the bias of the Fed? Full employment. So now, before inflation had gotten all the way back down where it was, the Fed would ease up by letting interest rates fall, and we go through another cycle. In other words, what would happen is there'd be another surge in demand, and now what would happen to inflation?
Increase.
It would go back to higher than it had ever been. Same thing again. So higher at all the peaks and higher at all the troughs. So was the Fed's initial intention to generate high inflation?
No.
No. Was the Fed's initial intention to generate higher interest rates?
Yes.
No, no, not in the long run, because the Fed's intention in the long run was to have full employment. But the problem is, by trying to have the full employment policy, we went through a number of these cycles, and inadvertently and unintentionally, over every one of these cycles, the peaks got higher and the troughs got higher. Does everybody see what happened? So the long-term policy is punctuated by these attempts to pull back, but to pull back is to tighten up, and the interest rates go higher and higher. Now you could say, well, Mike, why higher and higher? Well, if the prices over the long haul go higher and higher, who is ever going to lend at a rate of interest which is less than the rate of inflation? Nobody. Because if the rate of inflation is 10%, the price is going up 10% a year, that forms the floor. Nobody will lend at less than 10%. Because if you lend at a rate of interest which is less than 10%, and prices are rising by 10%, your interest is getting you nothing in real terms, is it? Because every year the value of the loan principal falls by 10%. So you have to charge at least 10% just to break even. Everybody see what's happening? So over the long haul, the interest rates went higher as the prices went higher. Even though that's not what the Federal Reserve intended. Now, let's go back to residential construction and automobiles. Let's throw all that in there. And let's take let's take the cycle. Let's say it's, this is about 1972, isn't it? Right here is about 1972, 3 maybe. So what happens? Interest rates are falling. Now interest rates are falling. What does that do to consumer demand?
Increase. Stimulates.
What happens, Josh, what happens to auto sales? Interest rates are falling. What happens to auto sales? Increase. Casey, interest rates are falling. What happens to residential construction?
Increase.
Increase. Economy starts to boom. What happens to construction of new automobile manufacturing plants? Up. New lumber mills, up. Does everybody get it? Everything is going north now. Surging demand. What happens to capacity utilization? Up. What happens to efficiency eventually? Down. Costs. And as costs rise, bumps prices up. Margin squeezed and inflation. Okay, now the Fed steps in. Does it like what it sees? No. Reverse course. Raise rates, exactly. Okay? Fed doesn't like to, but it's got to, right? Now, what's happening to inflation? North. What's happening to interest rates? North. In this climate, what do you think is happening to consumer confidence? Recession. What happens to housing starts, Casey?
Go down.
Auto sales, Josh?
Go down.
Recession. Everybody understand? The recession, the slump, the drop in demand alleviates the inflation for a while, doesn't it? And as the inflation gets less worse, the Fed permits the interest rates to fall. But the inflation didn't get back down to where it had been, and the interest rates didn't get back down to, does everybody see? It didn't quite get down to where it had been in the last trough. And so now, since the Fed's bias is, it lets the interest rates fall, right? They don't go quite back to where they were, and now we have a new boom again. And of course, what happens, the inflation gets higher than it ever did. The interest rates get higher than they ever did. And we're into a new cycle. Does everybody understand? And so, through the unintended consequences, the interest rates trail the inflation up. Cyclically. That's very important. You can't understand this unless you understand this. And despite the bias of full employment and expansion, the consequence is by 1979-80, record inflation and record interest rates. Everybody got it? So you can't really understand unless you weave all this together, right?